Now coming to the blood pressure regulation. Blood pressure regulation, first we have to know what is blood pressure. It is the lateral pressure exerted on the walls of the artery by the column of blood. And it usually has two components. One is the systolic component, another one is diastolic component. Systolic blood pressure, it is the maximum pressure in the artery during a systole. Everybody knows this. And the value, normal value is 120 mm of Hg. And diastolic blood pressure is the minimum pressure in the artery during a diastole. And it is usually 80 mm of Hg. There is something called as pulse pressure. The difference between a systolic blood pressure and a diastolic blood pressure is called as pulse pressure. So 120 minus 80, which gives around 40. That is the normal pulse pressure. What is the importance of this pulse pressure is, this is the one for which the baroreceptor is highly sensitive. So whenever there is a change in pulse pressure, the baroreceptor action will be more predominant. So baroreceptor sensitivity is more for this. Receptor sensitivity is high for pulse pressure. Then coming to the final component, that is mean arterial pressure, which is given by diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of pulse pressure. And how this has been derived? Always we think that mean arterial pressure is, mean means it's an average. So ideally the formula should have been diastolic blood pressure plus systolic blood pressure by 2. But we are not doing this. Why? Again, it brings us to the cardiac cycle. In the cardiac cycle, which has the maximum duration? Diastolic has the maximum duration. So what do we write as? We give 1/3 of systolic blood pressure and give more weightage to the diastolic blood pressure plus 2/3 of diastolic blood pressure. And instead of the systolic blood pressure, can I write diastolic blood pressure by pulse pressure? See this equation. Here I can convert the systolic blood pressure is equal to pulse pressure plus diastolic blood pressure. So instead of systolic blood pressure here, I am just going to substitute it. Let's see. Let's substitute and see. 1/3 of pulse pressure plus diastolic blood pressure plus 2/3 of diastolic blood pressure. That is 1/3 of pulse pressure plus 1/3 of diastolic blood pressure plus 2/3 of diastolic blood pressure. 1/3 and 2/3 is 3/3, which is diastolic blood pressure. So this will be our diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of pulse pressure. So that is the end formula. So they will give you some values and you just have to plug into this formula. It is diastolic blood pressure plus 1/3 of pulse pressure. Otherwise, it is 1/3 of systolic blood pressure plus 2/3 of diastolic blood pressure. Here diastolic component is more because of the duration of the diastole. Now coming to the proper regulation of blood pressure. The regulation of blood pressure can happen in various levels and it depends upon the how fast or how long the regulation is happening. And the classification goes like short-term regulation of blood pressure, intermediate regulation of blood pressure, and long-term regulation of blood pressure. Coming to the short-term regulation of blood pressure, which is very, very important. The short-term regulation is more important. Here we have the baroreceptors, chemoreceptors, and CNS ischemic response. We are going to study them in detail. Then coming to the intermediate regulation. Intermediate regulation is pretty simple. Whenever there is a too much pressure in the blood pressure, in the blood vessel, what will happen? There will be stretch of the blood vessel and fluid will move from the inside the capillary to outside the interstitial tissue. That is called as the capillary fluid shift. Another thing is stress relaxation of the muscle. So whenever the muscle is under the stress, what is going to happen? It is going to relax. It is going to relax and give the excess fluid whenever we put it into stretch. Another thing what can happen is whenever the pressure outside is high, it can shift the fluid to the other side. So this kind of fluid management is happening naturally at the level of the interstitial tissue and the blood vessel itself. So that is the intermediate regulation. And the long-term regulation is by the kidney. What is the system which is going to do the long-term regulation? It is the RAS system, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. And this angiotensin and aldosterone which is formed, they are powerful vasoconstrictors. So whenever the BP is falling, it will try to bring back it to the original levels. So the long-term regulation is the kidney. Now coming to the short-term regulators which are important, starting with our baroreceptors. So the baroreceptors, as the term baro indicates pressure. So baroreceptor, basically they are going to sense the pressure changes. How do they sense the pressure changes? They are sensitive to the stretch. So what happens whenever the BP is rising, it is going to stretch the vessels. So this signal will be carried to the brain to reduce the BP. That is what going to happen. So this stretch is sensed by it. That is the reason whenever we have a constantly raised blood pressure, the baroreceptor is not going to happen. Why? Because there should be a stretch, there should be a change in pressure to bring it back to normal. Suppose you are exercising, your BP shoots up, our baroreceptor will sense and bring it back to normal. But in a chronic hypertension, what happens? The stretch is kept constant. So the stretch will not be sensed. We need an active stretch in case of a baroreceptors. That is the reason we have chronic hypertension. Because for them, the stretch is always constant. So the baroreceptor will think that is his normal blood pressure. So it is also called as stretch receptors. Coming to the location of baroreceptors, where are they located? The baroreceptors are called as sinuses. These baroreceptors are called as sinuses, whereas chemoreceptors are called as bodies. It looks like a rounded body in structure, so that's why they are called bodies. So the baroreceptors are located in the aorta as well as the carotid. So they are called as aortic and carotid sinus. From the aorta, the impulse is carried by the vagus nerve. Vagus is the one which is going to carry the impulses in case of aortic sinus. Whereas for the carotid sinus, the glossopharyngeal is the one which is going to carry the impulses. And finally, all of them are going to reach the medulla only. Finally, they will have centers in the medulla. So let's see an example. What happens whenever there is a rise in BP? There is a rise in BP. What is going to happen? So what will happen? There will be a stretch in the vessels. So the baroreceptor will get activated and it will be carried through the glossopharyngeal and vagus. That is the 9th and 10th cranial nerve. And finally, they will reach the medulla. In medulla, if the question is asked, what is the particular center? If you ask me what is the exact location, it goes to nucleus tractus solitarius. It goes to nucleus tractus solitarius. This is one of the most important nuclei where all the sensation goes on in. What it will do is it will produce a neurotransmitter which is stimulatory. The plus sign indicates stimulatory and the neurotransmitter produced here is glutamate. Glutamate. It is going to stimulate two principal areas. The principal areas are called as CVLM and CIC. What is the CVLM? It is caudal ventrolateral medulla. It is nothing but the caudal ventrolateral medulla. And what is CAC? It is cardio inhibitory center. So let's see with the CAC what is happening. It is very easy to understand. This cardio inhibitory center, the name itself says it is going to inhibit the cardiac. So it is going to give the vagal fibers. And what is the function of vagus? It is parasympathetic in action. So it is going to reduce the heart rate. So what has happened? Whenever there is an increase in BP, it is reducing my heart rate. So first thing, it has reduced my heart rate. Second thing is it is going to the CVLM. This CVLM, whenever it is stimulated, it is like a brake. What it is going to do? It is going to inhibit the RVLM. It is going to inhibit the center, that is RVLM. RVLM is inhibited with the help of a neurotransmitter, that is a GABA. RVLM is nothing but rostral ventrolateral medulla. So what is going to happen for the RVLM? RVLM, if it is not inhibited, like what is the normal function of RVLM? It increases the sympathetic outflow and it increases the heart rate and it increases the contractility of the heart. So basically RVLM is like a sympathetic system. It is going to increase the sympathetic activity. But right now what we have done? We have inhibited the RVLM. So what will be our end results? There will be a decrease in heart rate and decrease in contractility of the heart, leading to decrease in stroke volume. Already the parasympathetic system has decreased the heart rate. So the final end result is decrease in heart rate, decrease in stroke volume, which will lead to the decrease in cardiac output. So final end result is the decrease in cardiac output. So whenever the BP is increasing, what is going to happen? Let's revise them back. Whenever the BP is increasing, in the example we saw, parasympathetic was getting activated. That is the cardiac inhibitory center was getting activated and they reduce the heart rate. And the sympathetic system, the RVLM, was deactivated, like we are inhibiting the sympathetic system, and there is a decrease in stroke volume. The end result will be decrease in cardiac output, finally decreasing the BP. So as and when we have an increase in BP, the baroreceptor will decrease the BP very nicely and beautifully. Otherwise, what will happen? We cannot do our day-to-day life activities also. Then, whenever there is a decrease in BP, there is no stretch in the baroreceptors. So what they will do? They will do the reverse. Parasympathetic activity will be reduced. It will increase the heart rate and sympathetic activity is increased, which is increasing the stroke volume. So cardiac output will be increased and BP will be increased. So the reverse happens. Whenever there is a decrease in BP, the baroreceptors, by not stretching, they will do the reverse action and help to increase the BP and restore blood flow. So this is all about the baroreceptors. Now coming to the chemoreceptors. Chemo, as the term indicates, it is sensing the chemicals. These are nothing but the chemical sensors. So what do? They will detect, they are not usually activated. The baroreceptor acting range is 80 to 180 mm of Hg. Whenever the BP is changing in between these ranges, the baroreceptor will take care of them. But whenever the BP falls below 70, then baroreceptor cannot sense it properly. Whenever the BP falls below 70, who is going to come into action? The chemoreceptors. The chemoreceptors will sense the chemical changes. What are all the chemicals it is going to sense? It is going to sense the hypoxia, that is decrease in PO2, hypercapnia, increase in PCO2, or increase in H+, that is the hydrogen ion increase. So all these are going to be sensed. It will be sensed by the chemoreceptors, which is located in the aortic and carotid. But right now, there are special sensors which look like an oval shaped body. That's why they will go to aortic body and carotid body. So these are the two sensors. Then what is the action? So whenever there is a fall in BP of very low levels, what should we do? We should try to bring back the BP to normal. So what will happen is this can directly stimulate. This is the direct action. So whenever there is hypoxia, the direct action is it will directly stimulate the RVLM. RVLM, all of us have studied just now. It increases stroke volume, increases the BP. So fall in BP is corrected nicely with the help of this stimulation of RVLM. But they might ask you a different question. What is happening to the heart rate whenever there is a hypoxia? Here we have to read the question very carefully, whether they are asking for mild hypoxia or moderate to severe hypoxia, or whether they are asking direct action or whether they are asking indirect action. Whenever the hypoxia is severe, directly it will go for an indirect action. Let's try to understand it. First, it has increased the BP. That is pretty simple. Next thing what it will do is, it will go and stimulate the cardiac inhibitory center. Whenever there is a mild hypoxia, they are going to stimulate the cardiac inhibitory center and they are going to decrease the heart rate. Cardiac inhibitory center. It is decreasing the heart rate and finally they will cause bradycardia. This is the direct action of hypoxia, especially mild hypoxia. But what happens in moderate hypoxia? Moderate hypoxia, we are just talking about the CVS here. But more than that, hypoxia is a very good stimulus for respiration. So what happens in hypoxia? We will start breathing in more faster. So there is an increase in respiration which is happening in hypoxia. And this increase in respiration will be increasing the stretch of the lung. So this stretch of the lung is a negative stimulus to the cardiac inhibitory center. So the cardiac inhibitory center is inhibited, so there will be a rise in heart rate which is causing the tachycardia. So please remember, direct action is bradycardia, indirect action is tachycardia. But most of the times in case of moderate and severe hypoxia, we just see the tachycardia. And this tachycardia will enhance the circulation also. So this is the thing that is going to happen in chemoreceptors. And what happens here is, where the baroreceptor, they are acting at 80 to 180 and the chemoreceptors, they are acting below 70. So from below 70, what they will do, they will try to put it back to 80. Then the baroreceptor will pick it up and correct the BP. But if the baroreceptor is still failing or there is a hemorrhage, what will happen? Then again it will come back to 70. Then chemoreceptor will act, again it will put it back to 80. It will keep on trying to save the person until it becomes stabilized. And this wave changes can be seen in the recording of the blood pressure. These kind of wave changes will happen. It will happen at their BP changes will be very high. Like it will be at more than 10 mm change BP will be there. This type of wave changes, we will see that which is happening in between the baroreceptor and chemoreceptor. It has been given a special name, that is Traub Herring wave. And these pattern is seen for 1 minute, like 6 to 10 cycles only. Traub Herring waves. We will see this waves again, but right now remember the fluctuations of BP which is happening due to the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors will produce the Traub Herring waves. Now coming to the next response in the short-term regulation itself, that is called the CNS ischemic response. As the term indicates, the CNS is going in for an ischemia. So what will happen whenever CNS goes for an ischemia? Directly. This happens whenever the BP falls below 50 mm of Hg. Some books write below 20 mm of Hg only they get activated. So whenever the BP falls to very low levels, what will happen? obviously the blood supply to the brain is compromised. There will be direct hypoxia in the medullary region itself. So this direct hypoxia in the medullary region, what it can do is it can stimulate the RVLM directly. And RVLM is a strong sympathetic stimulator, which we want right now. It is a strong sympathetic stimulator, so it will constrict the vessels and will increase the cardiac output and do everything and try to restore the BP to 220 mm of Hg. See, from 50, it is putting the BP back to 220 mm of Hg. It is such a beautiful response, but only the catch here is it will happen only for 2 to 3 minutes. By that time, we should intervene from the outside, maybe do a fluid correction in case of an hemorrhage or do any other treatment which is required. So this is like a final help for the person. So that's why this has been given a beautiful name that is called as last ditch stand. If the person is able to survive or we are able to intervene in this stage, he can be saved. Otherwise, he will be dead, because it is like the final call, final try of the body to save from severe fall in BP. Then there is another reflex called as Cushing reflex. Cushing reflex is like the brother of CNS ischemic response, but here the reason is very specified. CNS ischemia can happen due to multiple reasons, but whenever it is happening due to the increased intracranial tension, that is called ICT. Whenever there is too much of pressure in the intracranium, what is going to happen? It is going to compress the vessel and cause the hypoxia. The same thing is happening, but the reason here is raised intracranial tension. That is the most important thing. So again, it will increase the BP and it will also stimulate the cardiac inhibitory center and it will cause decrease in heart rate. What happens is here the BP is raised to high levels. Whenever the BP is raised high levels, what will happen? It will be sensed by the baroreceptors. The baroreceptors, as we have seen previously also, whenever the baroreceptors, the BP is increasing, they are going to stimulate the cardiac inhibitory center and reduce the heart rate. So this is having reflexly. This reduction in heart rate is happening reflexly. So there is a classical triad which is seen in Cushing's reflex. First thing is there is increase in blood pressure. This is the first event. And because of this increase in blood pressure, what is happening? It is causing a reflex bradycardia. Reflex bradycardia. Then there is the respiratory centers are also affected and it will cause irregular respiration. So this is the classical triad of Cushing's reflex. Irregular respiration. So this is the classical triad. So this is all about the regulations of BP. And coming to the Traub Herrings and Mayer wave, I have mistakenly mentioned it as Traub Herring waves there. It is not Traub Herrings, sorry. It is the Mayer waves. Here this waves is called as the Mayer waves. This Mayer waves. Whenever there is a BP fluctuation changes which is happening due to the baroreceptors and chemoreceptors, it is called as Mayer waves. And Traub Herring wave is the BP changes which happens during respiration. During normal respiration also there is BP change. What happens during inspiration? During inspiration, the right ventricular input is more. The right ventricular, the more and more blood is coming to the right ventricle. So there is ventricular interdependence. There is something called as ventricular interdependence. So one ventricle is dependent on the other. If this ventricle is having more blood, then obviously the other ventricle will be pushed and there will be little less blood in them. Ventricular interdependence. And our systolic BP is based on what? Systolic BP is based on the left ventricular output. Now right ventricle is having more blood, left ventricle has a little less blood. So what has happened? There is a fall in BP. But during early part of expiration, there is an increase in BP. So this is called a Traub Herring wave. This is called a Traub Herring wave. The BP fluctuation during inspiration. This will happen for all the inspiratory cycles. Whereas our Mayer wave was happening for very long duration like this, and this happens for a 6 to 10 cycles in 1 minute, because this here the baroreceptor, here the chemoreceptor will try to put it to baroreceptor and the baroreceptor will try to stabilize, but if it is not able to do, again it will fall, again the chemoreceptor will do. So these kinds of BP or vasomotor changes which is happening due to these reflexes are called as the Mayer waves. These two can be asked as an MCQ questions also.